actually do think it's so untenable what's happening when you look in a classroom. I really like it as a new parent. I want to be there for my son, as he grows older and not get a chronic condition. And then I think it is absolutely shocking what's happening to kids. Yeah.
So Kelly, tell me from your perspective, being in the inside and working in this space and having sort of going to Harvard Business School, understanding, the way the economy, capitalism works and government works, being on the inside of think tanks like the Heritage Foundation, this isn't a bipartisan. I mean, this isn't a partisan issue. This is a bipartisan issue. We all are humans. We all have bodies. We all are sick. And then, obesity doesn't discriminate whether you're right wing or left wing, and the real question is, not about whether this problem exists, not about the manipulation of science, public opinion, policy, professional associations, social groups by the food industry and pharma. It's how do we solve this? What's really needed from a legal and policy perspective to fix this rigged system? And what do we do about it? Because people listening are probably outraged. I certainly am. That's why I wrote Food Fix. I mean, I remember thinking about it. I wrote Food Fix in 2020, was published in 2020. In 2005, I wrote a book called Ultra Metabolism, my second book, and I'm on my 18th book, which basically talked about the toxic triad of big food, big pharma, and big ag. And that was even before a lot of this crazy data came out. So how do we navigate a future that looks different, that helps solve our obesity crisis, that helps solve our corrupt food system, that helps solve our corrupt pharma and medical healthcare system? What do we do?
Let me start high level and take it down. So I think the foundation of public policy, in my head, it should be around, think about a child's cells. Right now, that child has subsidized poisonous food. We have no healthcare until they get sick. And then when they get sick, we have all these incentives for, as they grow older, to continue and not learning about metabolic habits, about food. We literally give them statins, metformin, now Ozempic, and literally the message of those is you can still eat what you want. And we're not learning foundational habits, right? So I think that's the high level, like framework. So then you get down, it's like on food, it's like, how do we incentivize healthy food? I refuse to believe this idea that people just want to eat the crappy food. Like, crappy food is heavily subsidized. Whole food is more expensive. So you start, and there's some simple things everyone should be arguing for, but it's like, where are we subsidizing bad food? We spend tens of billions of dollars right now on subsidies.
You mean for agriculture, or you mean for SNAP or food stamps?
Well, let's go. We spend tens of billions of dollars on agriculture subsidies, which subsidize the grains and the corn that turn into fructose and highly processed grains. So that's one area.
Yeah, let me just give you a little anecdote on that. I had a dinner with the vice chairman of Pepsi years ago. He's no longer there, but he was an endocrinologist, a diabetes specialist from Mayo Clinic, who, by the way, had diabetes himself. And I said to him, why do you use high fructose corn syrup in Pepsi? He says, Mark, the government makes it too cheap for us not to use it.
Right.
And we know that people say, oh, it's no different than sugar. It actually is, because free fructose is extremely dangerous for your metabolism and drives fatty liver, insulin resistance, diabetes. And even though it doesn't, quote, raise blood sugar, it has all these other harmful effects.
Well, my understanding too, Mark, is that it shuts off your hunger. It makes you want to eat more.
It shuts off your appetite. Suppressing hormones. Yeah.
As I think David Perlmutter, the book you have here, Drop Acid, talks about, and Nature Wants Us to Be Fat, another great book. But it literally is weaponization. It makes you want to eat more. So we're subsidizing that corn that turns into high fructose corn syrup, which is weaponized sugar, right? So that's just issue number one. If I'm a parent, if you're listening to this and outraged and want to get, into this policy fight, this thing we should do, number one, is stop the agriculture subsidies. As you point out in the Food Fix, just 0.4% at last count of agriculture subsidies go to fruits or vegetables. They're considered specialty crops. So just as a fundamental policy instrument, we should be fixing the externalities. Right now, it's totally backwards. We're literally subsidizing with direct agriculture subsidies the foods that you can directly tie to trillions of dollars of downstream health impacts.
I mean, I think, in my mind, it's a little bit of a complicated issue whether or not, getting rid of the supports for agricultural crops that are producing these raw materials of high fructose corn syrup and soybean oil and junk food, flour and wheat. The truth is the cost of these foods is far more than we're paying at the checkout counter. The true cost of food, according to the Rockefeller Foundation, is 3 times what we pay. So you pay $1 for a can of Coke, let's say, the real cost is probably $3, or maybe for Coke, it may be 10 or 20 or $100 when you take in all the effects. So we're not actually having a true free market system. If we were, having a true free market system, we would pay for all the embedded costs in whatever product we're producing, whether it's oil or whether it's sugar. And we don't do that. And so these products are artificially priced very low.
Right.
And that's driving increased consumption. So you can buy most places a 2-liter bottle of soda cheaper than you can buy a 2-liter bottle of water.
Right.
How does that make
so
any
many
sense?
subsidized ingredients.
Right.
Yeah. So I think with the grain, that's just an easy place to start. Before we talk about anything even potentially polarizing like bans or taxes, like let's not even go there. Let's stop subsidizing. We should, as you said, just economics dictates that if these foods are producing trillions of dollars of downstream negative health impacts, costs, and just decimation of human capital in the form of diabetes, then you should price those externalities in, that the soda should be more expensive. Not only do we not price those negative externalities in, we actually subsidize the products themselves. So I'll just tick off a couple more.
Right. We pay for it, multiple times of corn. We pay for the corn to be grown. Yeah. We pay for the downstream economic consequences of the, and the environmental consequences of climate change as a result of our farming practices. Yeah. We're not paying for the damage to all the waterways from all the nitrogen fertilizer that's used that destroys our waterways and kills all those sort of fish. We're not paying for the economic cost of the pesticides and the harm on human health. We're then paying again for using these products in the poor through the subsidization of food through food stamps and SNAP. So we're basically spending huge amounts of money buying those foods and paying for them essentially for the poor. And then on the back end, we're paying for Medicare and Medicaid to take care of people who are sick from eating those foods. So if you actually got the true cost of what it would be to actually embed the cost of the corn production and the downstream products from that, it would be, staggering. We'd be maybe paying $100 for a can of soda.
Yeah. So that brings me to a second thing, which is a little bit outside the political sphere, but I think very important is, so this viral tweet about Coke's practice with the food stamps.
Of Coke what?
Of my viral tweet about the Coke food stamp rigging of the system. My initial tweet that went viral about exposing that. Bill Ackman, who's a very wealthy, famous hedge fund manager, retweeted that and said it is due time that basically billionaires step up and other folks to fund and help catalyze class action lawsuits against Coke and Pepsi, such as like we had with tobacco. And what all the tobacco lawsuits were about is that they were consciously basically rigging the system knowingly and producing really disastrous economic externalities. I think the same thing is happening with sugar, big sugar right now, big soda, except the only difference is that the impact on Americans is an order of magnitude worse. Yeah. And I do think, as I'm talking about, and I think is manifestly clear, there is a conscious rigging of academic institutions, of civil rights institutions, of, Coke also pays a ton of money and a huge amount of effort to have soda machines in schools. 80% of high schools still have soda machines.
Yeah, I mean, they have reduced the sugar sweetened beverages in them, but they replace it with artificially sweetened drinks or juice or chocolate milk.
Well, I'll tell you, I was recently, giving birth to our son in a pediatric ward. It was full strength Coke. In the vending machines in the pediatric ward. And my understanding is that the majority of pediatric wards still have full sugar Coke. And that's a very calculated effort, right, to normalize these things in institutions of trust. So I do think there's a playbook, and there's actually, very interestingly, I've been lucky to see this effort and appetite from leading lawyers to follow the tobacco playbook. And I do think that's a good free market. And I do think that is a way, a system that we have, to price in those externalities. I mean, in the year 2000, not that long ago, Philip Morris, if you look at the most valuable companies in the world, I think it was top 10. I mean, it was one of the most valuable companies in the world. they've really fallen from grace, I think appropriately, as the externalities were priced in.
It was interesting. A lot of the food companies and tobacco companies were the same companies. RJR,
Oh, yeah.
Nabisco,
Reynolds, yeah.
Philip Morris,
Yeah.
Kraft.
Right, right.
They recently sort of have
Right,
separated, but like they were really in the same business and used the same tactics.
Well, now the processed food companies are merging with pharma companies, so it's just a full getting sick, and then Monsanto, Bayer on down. So
and what people don't know is that health insurance companies, big health insurers, are buy fast food company stock to actually hedge against their losses.
I mean, it's a vertically integrated system. So I think
as they maybe lose money with people being sicker, they make money by people eating more junk. So it's a whole screwed up model.
Yeah. No, it's insane. But yeah, so I'm hopeful on that. The third one I'll say, and this is also I think where public pressure matters. And just one sidebar here, Mark, on public pressure. And I've been meeting with a lot of lawmakers and a lot of policymakers who are somewhat pessimistic about this movement being changed. I think we're all kind of concerned about money in politics and the money these industries have. There's one thing that counteracts money for a politician. Yes, being paid by these industries helps. It's grassroots effort. If they get a lot of calls, a lot of interest from voters, that is the only thing more important than money.
Yeah.
So a third thing that I think is very important that grassroots efforts. But a third thing I think that's very important to potentially steer a grassroots effort is a very simple point about government guidelines. A very interesting stat and a very interesting principle I've found doing this work is that people actually do listen to medical elites. When the Surgeon General in the 1980s said, hey, let's cut down on smoking, and made a clear voice on that, which by the way was 20 years too late, just like we're seeing now. It was way late, but you need to understand in the 1960s, 6% of all government revenue came from tobacco taxes. Yeah. There was huge financial incentives there. It was these were some of the most largest companies, right?
Yeah.
So you had a late assertion from the Surgeon General. Smoking plummeted. Yeah. Smoking plummeted from there. In the 1990s with the food pyramid, it was disastrous. That was a violent document to our metabolic health. But that changed behavior. We followed it. We followed, we followed orders with
I certainly did. I was like, oh, pasta. Yeah, it's a health food. Right. Yippee, let's have pasta every night.
Right. And, we follow, I think we saw a lot of, herd mentality around COVID. So we do, for better or worse, listen to medical authorities. And I will just say this, and I do think this is a big part of the solution. And I want everyone to kind of understand this. Why the hell do we have the FDA and CDC saying 10% sugar consumption, added sugar consumption is okay for 2-year-olds? That is what we're saying right now.
It's insane.
We literally have.
I mean, the World Heart, it was interesting. I don't know if you know this, but it's kind of loop back on this. Under George W. Bush, Donald Rumsfeld, who was the defense secretary at the time, went to Geneva to meet with the World Health Organization to tell them that the U.S. would withhold $400 million in their annual funding for the World Health Organization if they went ahead with their guidelines for sugar intake for adults and children, which was to take it from 10% to 5%. So they basically blackmailed the World Health Organization, the U.S. government, because of the industry push, to prevent the World Health Organization from lowering its recommendations to 5%, which really should be 0.
Right.
Well, there should be no recommendations for sugar. It should be a treat. It should be known as a potential toxin poison. And I think if you want to have it occasionally, fine. If you want to drink a glass of wine, have a glass of tequila once in a while, fine. But understand that this is a poison, that it's a drug, that it's dangerous, and that you should be careful with it.
Well, I'm a libertarian. I think most drugs should be legal. I enjoy a nice glass of wine. I don't think we should be totally puritanical on this stuff. What I think we need to do is understand that sugar is a highly addictive and very dangerous drug. And it's not a drug that should be subsidized. When you add up all the programs, $100 billion plus, right? And this 10% thing, what a joke. What a joke. Let's give 10% wink, wink, recommended or approved for 2-year-olds. So you give a 2-year-old a highly addictive drug. You expect that to stay at 10%? Yeah. Have you seen any kid, even the most well-meaning parents? It is literally like a kid's, a day with a 3-year-old these days is like a meth addict looking for sugar.
Yeah.
It really is. It's very dispiriting.
No,
and a
it's
lot
true.
of my friends,
It's
and
true.
I'm really trying to prevent that. But when you
It's
addict
true.
a kid to a highly addictive drug,
It's
which
so
is
true.
literally what sugar is, what a joke. So I do think, and we look for,
And the biology of this is clear. It's not hyperbolic to say that these are addictive compounds. We know from Dr. David Lidov's research at Harvard and others that these sugar compounds in food affect the nucleus accumbens in the brain, which is the same center that gets triggered by heroin or cocaine or nicotine or alcohol.
Well, so physiologically, the dopamine receptors, and yeah, I'm glad to hear that you affirm that. It seems very clear that it's very similar to a drug. I recently posted something on Twitter where you can actually tie the amount of deaths for each drug, right? And sugar is by far, just factually, the highest killing drug in the country, much more than opioids, far more than zero of LSD and psilocybin, which we stigmatize. So it's just like, and actually the ones at the top, sugar is by far and away the most. It's the legal ones. It's alcohol, it's methamphetamines, which we provide to kids in the form of Adderall. So it's these things we actually subsidize, and then drugs that are more stigmatized go down. But then opiates, of course, which 90% of opioids come from a prescription pad, and then people seek it illegally. So we have it totally backwards. And I just want to say this, and I think, and I'm chatting with some folks that I used to work with in DC, and who I think are on the right side now, and some various interests. At True Medicine, we're trying to solve the issue, but we really want to just be at the forefront. I want to spend the next 20 years, 30 years of my life talking about this issue. And I do think this is one area where we can have grassroots support. The guidelines for children for sugar should be 0, period. We have the guideline committee coming up.
Right.
Fatima Stanford at Harvard, who I mentioned, who's on the payroll of Ozempic, is on that committee. We literally have doctors right now who are saying that obesity isn't the result of eating or exercise on this committee. That is a big fight. If the government says if the government says we shouldn't be having sugar for kids, you'd have monumental impacts, because that affects school lunches, This is not nanny state stuff. We should not be subsidizing and encouraging drugs for children as young as 2. So that is a big one we should do. I think just from a public policy perspective, we should be asking and attacking this incentive. The core incentive, as we talked about, is that 95% of healthcare spending go to interventions once people are sick.
Yeah, right.
We fundamentally have to work and support and ask our members of Congress and research and advocate for that problem. Do not be fooled. Do not be fooled by politicians and folks saying about improving access. That is a ruse. The problem with healthcare right now is not that not enough people don't have access to drugs and our broken system. Like, if there's acute issues, if somebody has an acute issue that's life-threatening, of course, we need to have healthcare for them. But I really do think this whole debate about access, it's not access. It's the fact that the system is broken. That is the core problem with healthcare. The problem with healthcare is that so many people are getting sick. How do we stop that? And the way to stop that is just, again, pretend you're an alien coming down to Earth. And when you're thinking about healthcare policies and thinking about dollars being spent, we're now waiting for everyone to get sick. We need to, and I'm having some interesting conversations. I think more people are realizing this, but we need to look at the $4 trillion we're spending on healthcare, realizing that 95% is behind the curtain once you get sick. And we need to slant that to more food as medicine programs to keep people healthy. I don't like this box of preventative health people talk about with food. Whenever probably you talk to people about, oh yeah, there's some community preventative programs. No. Food is the best reversal as well.
Yeah.
You put food up against a statin, you put food up against metformin. Food let's not put it in this niche preventative box. Casey talks about when she used to do dietary interventions, for patients when she was a surgeon who had a migraine, which is clearly metabolically tied, or a lot of these inflammation issues. Her boss said to her, looked in the eyes and said, "Don't be a."
Yeah.
And that is how the medical system sees nutritional interventions.
It's true. The order of magnitude of impact from food interventions for people who have advanced disease is so much greater than pharma interventions.
Right.
I'm agnostic when it comes to treatment. I will use drugs or surgery or whatever the right treatment is. And, if I can, maybe get someone's blood sugar A1C down by 1 or 2 points with a drug, I can get it down by 6 or 7 or 8 points with food.
Right.
And that just there's no contest. It's not like it's like maybe 10% better, 20% better. It's probably tenfold more effective.
We've got to make that point and have policy follow that. Food is not in a preventative lifestyle bucket. It is a serious medical intervention. And again, it's not anti-drug, it's not pro-food. Let's take every condition we're facing and ask, how can we spend money to both prevent and reverse? The data coming out, the studies on Alzheimer's reversal, the studies on obviously diabetes reversal, which many quarters say can't even be reversed anymore. The obesity, obviously, heart disease, kidney disease, COVID deaths. I mean, you have to follow those trillions of dollars that we spend in policy and move more towards that.
Yeah. I really applaud what you've done, Callie, to educate people, to be out there in the media, to be running around when you have a kid and a business to run, and actually talking about these issues when you have, other things to focus on that are your primary concern. But you are kind of a new and very loud and very powerful voice in this conversation that's raising awareness where it has been raised before, despite many other people talking about it. So I really applaud what you've done. I think you're bringing these issues to light. I also think that you're highlighting things that actually need to be done. We need to get the conflicts out of the funding for medicine and food research. We need to get the conflicts out of the professional societies. We need to kind of create some kind of transparency and regulatory awareness around how these food companies manipulate social groups and public opinion. And we need to develop real strategies around changing food policy, which is what the Food Fix campaign, a nonprofit that I created to actually educate lawmakers who, by the way, are often very well-meaning, but don't know much about these issues, not because of any fault of their own, but because they're only hearing from the food industry. And so, as they begin to become aware of these issues, we've met with over 75 lawmakers in Congress, both sides of the aisle. We have incredible awareness and support around this now. And I think there's the potential to really change this conversation. It's not going to be an easy fight. I think the food industry and the agriculture industry and the farm industry are funding huge amounts of lobby efforts and are influencing lawmakers in ways that I think are really unfortunate. But I do think there's a sort of an opening, and there are people like Cory Booker, Vern Buchanan, who's now the chair of the Health Subcommittee and the Ways and Means Committee, people like Jim McGovern, Senator Marshall from Kansas, senators that I met with from Arkansas, Boozman and others are very clear that we have a problem and that we have to deal with this both from an economic perspective, a social perspective. So whether you're Democrat, Republican, left or right, this is affecting every single one of us, every one of our families, all of our children, and it's a national crisis. And I think that it needs to be like that. Just like we had a massive effort to address COVID. Imagine if we spent a fraction of that.
It's crippling our country.
A fraction of that. And we spent like, what, $3-4 trillion dealing with COVID? If we spent a fraction of that on just dealing with these issues around changing our food system, around fixing some of these policies, we could really make a huge effort and create a society that's healthier, that's happier, that's more globally competitive, where we're not crippling our future generations of kids, both mentally and physically, shortening their life expectancy. And, where we're also, as a side effect, improving the environment and climate and doing so many things as a result of fixing the sort of embedded problems in our food and healthcare systems.
It's so obvious to me. It's the first order issue.
And it really is. I thank you for saying that. And, as a doctor, obviously I'm very focused on this, but as a, businessman, as a graduate of Harvard Business School, I mean, as a former consultant for the Heritage Foundation, that you're getting these ideas out there and talking about this, to me is one of the greatest things I've seen in a long time.
Thank you, Mark. And if I could just give you one quick story, is that okay?
Yeah, let's do
it. When I really decided to make this my life's calling, I bonded a year and a half ago with a guy named Justin Mayers, who was working in tech and had his own health issues and solved them through food. He started a company called Kettle and Fire, a leading bone broth company, Perfect Keto. And we literally in these early conversations, we didn't have a company, we were just kind of brainstorming how we could both have impact. And we said, we want to bring your, like Mark Hyman's vision to life. We want to be foot soldiers in the mission that you have been tirelessly fighting for. I really mean that. We both, Food Fix was one of the most influential books we've ever read. Like, how can we be foot soldiers in this effort? So I see, I appreciate what you said, but I see everything we're doing as connected. This company, the mission of this company is we want to, at the high end, call this out. Justin's seen within the food systems, my political background. I think a lot of people don't talk about these dynamics because of the financial considerations and their paycheck is paid by this. We wanted to be in a place where we could call this out and be foot soldiers in your movement. And then, getting the solutions. I really do think this FSA, HSA, these accounts that give a consumer's choice, $140 billion is in them. Most people don't optimize them. I never use them. But that's where we need to move to, having your own account, these tax advantage money. Mm-hmm. And we simply ask, like, it's simple. It's a question you phrased, but it's how do we incentivize better behaviors? Yeah. And these are actually, you can use these accounts. We kind of expect to use them on drugs. It's for when you get sick. No, if you have a doctor's note, if you have a recommendation from a doctor, I think your clinics do this sometimes, you can actually purchase food and exercise if it's substantiated with studies that can be a good reversal or prevention. And of course it is. Yeah, of course. So that's what we're doing, TrueMed.com, to kind of try to solve this. But yeah, what we're in this fight for, what we kind of got amped up devoting our lives to do is continue communicating and exposing as best we can the issues that you've been at the forefront on. And it's really an honor to be able to communicate these. And it really is, it's looking backwards at my mom. I want other people to prevent their parents from dying early of a metabolic condition that's preventable, and looking forward. It sounds trite, but like, I am concerned about this world my son is going into. And I think a lot of people feel that way. And it's just a real gratitude to be able to communicate this mission.
Thank you, Callie, for what you're doing. Keep going. Keep fighting the fight.
Thank you.
Keep having the conversations that matter.